This is From Now On. I'm Lisa Phillips. Just a heads up, this episode contains discussions of online predatory grooming, sexual assault, human trafficking, and stalking. Some might find it upsetting. We encourage you to take care of yourself. Welcome back to From Now On. Last episode, Jane Doe shared a shocking story of a predator using a dating app to assault women and the legal system that failed her. In part 2 of our series, we're exploring a scary reality of online dating, the hidden role some platforms play in enabling sex trafficking. While dating apps are often seen as a convenient tool for love and connection, predators are increasingly using them to lure unsuspecting women into dangerous and life-altering situations. In recent years, dating apps have become immensely popular, with over 30 million Americans using them to find companionship, romance, or hookups. Unfortunately, traffickers and pimps have also infiltrated these platforms. As crackdowns on websites like Craigslist and Backpage have forced these predators to seek new avenues, dating apps have become a prime hunting ground. Traffickers are calculated and manipulative, often masking their intentions with promises of financial help, exciting opportunities, or even love. They may present themselves as caring and generous, but beneath the surface, they are working to isolate, control, and exploit their victims. In this episode, we'll uncover the critical warning signs that someone you met via a dating app might be attempting to traffic you. Overly controlling behavior. Be cautious of anyone who seeks to monitor your movements, restrict your interactions with others, or make decisions on your behalf. Control is often a key tactic traffickers use to manipulate their victims. Unusual interests and travel plans. A predator may try to push you into traveling for vague business opportunities or to meet someone they claim will help you. Always question why they are invested in your travel. Isolation tactics. If someone tries to separate you from your support system, whether by undermining your relationships with friends or family or creating a physical distance, this is a significant red flag. Financial incentives or grandiose promises. Offers of money, gifts, or career opportunities may seem appealing, but can be used to manipulate and trap you. Predators often use these tactics to gain trust before revealing their true intentions. Evasive and vague details. If someone is reluctant to share clear information about themselves, their plans, or people they want you to meet, this is a major warning sign. Also today, our guest will provide actionable tips to protect yourself, but here's 3 musts. Number 1, stay connected. Keep friends or family informed about your dating plans, including who you're meeting and where. Share your location during dates and ensure someone knows when you're expected to return. Always meet in a public place. Always meet for the first time in a well-lit public location and avoid isolated areas, like his home, and also when you're dependent on the other person for transportation. Trust your instincts. If something feels off, don't dismiss it. Listen to your gut and prioritize your safety over politeness or fear of judgment. Sex trafficking is a global crisis, and dating apps have unfortunately become a tool for predators to exploit vulnerable individuals. Awareness and vigilance are your best defenses. By recognizing the warning signs and taking proactive measures, you can protect yourself from falling into these dangerous situations. Dating apps can still be a wonderful way to find love and connection, but it's essential to navigate them with your eyes wide open, girls. Stay tuned as we break down how these schemes work. Listen to Jane Doe's story of survival and empower yourself with the knowledge you need to stay safe in this ever-evolving world of online dating. Today's guest is an artist, animator, and has spent 15 years in the IT tech space. She's also a survivor of deeply traumatic events, which have forever transformed the course of her life. Jane Doe is passionate to educate others on the intersection of tech and exploitation through her own experiences. She is actively embracing the pain of rebuilding and healing to explore advocacy opportunities to create dating app safety PSAs, educate others on the complexities of sexual assault and human trafficking, to help end exploitation, specifically as it relates to power imbalances and predatory playbooks. I am grateful today to welcome Jane Doe to From Now On. How long was it from your assault that you got back on the dating app?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I still viewed the app as something that I had researched, and it was all the things, it was vetted. And so I viewed the rape and the roofie as like lightning, right? Like that could only happen once, right?
Yeah, one-off thing.
I still didn't have the ability to comprehend that this exists in the world, right?
Oh, that it was connected to the app in any way.
Yeah.
Okay.
And part of the app's kind of marketing, its thing is they push these curated matches every day at a certain time. And in the aftermath of the assault, my world shattered, and I was grasping for like any sense of normalcy, right?
Yeah.
And so I stayed in the app, searching for that normalcy, searching for that love, of, that connection with a professional.
Yeah, of course.
And I also like took a very proactive route into therapy, right? So like I have the app still on my phone. I'm still like going through the motions. And so it was about, I think 8 months later that I thought, okay. And it was a conscious decision with my therapist, like, okay, like I'm going to try this again,
Yeah. Okay.
And I matched with another man on that app months later with a very, I mean, it's very dark now, like to hear the story here and think of this in retrospect. But at the time, I thought, this is my opportunity to reclaim my power, my autonomy, my body, the way that I go through the world. It's not gonna, what happened. I was so determined to not let what happened to me and that violence influence my lens of other men. Like I wanted to believe, all men aren't this, right? And so like,
all men aren't like that.
yeah, there couldn't be another predatory person. But I was mistaken. Yeah, unfortunately.
You connect with a professor from an elite school.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit more about him?
Yeah, it was, I think I still had that worldview of, okay, if someone's an accomplished professional, they wouldn't risk who they are and what they've built, and they couldn't be someone that would harm others, right? And I was excited for the potential not only to kind of reclaim and figure out myself after something so traumatic, but I think the differentiator was the other person being in the sports world. Like, I don't follow sports, it's not my thing. And this person really appealed to that cerebral, kind of nerdy type that I have, like I romanticize the concept of that.
Right. So you felt like this is a better match.
Yeah. I thought, okay, like something very tragic happened. I still didn't know how I would heal or get past that. And I still question that today, but I had hope. So yeah, I matched with him. It was kind of odd because the app had rematched us, which isn't really a thing. But I thought,
oh, so you had declined him at first.
Yeah, like months before, after the rape, we had been matched. But again, I was just kind of going through the motions. And so I matched back, and he made plans, in his words, to wine and dine me. And
well, that's okay.
Yeah, like again, I thought of it from a perspective of like, I deserve that. I deserve someone to treat me nice and take me out. What I know now, looking back on it, learning just as self-education and trafficking and all of the things, there's what's known as a lover boy playbook. So someone comes on very strong, very romantic, treats you over the top, and in doing so, they let you take your guard down.
Oh, sure.
Right?
I thought that was the narcissistic playbook.
Yeah.
So it's a lover boy playbook?
Yeah. So
it's an actual thing?
Yeah, lover boy playbook. It's similar to what Tate, Andrew Tate, kind of played on his little sick game as well.
Right.
So yeah, it basically, he took me on 3 whirlwind dates.
Oh, wow.
Over the
Tell
top.
me about these dates.
Yeah. The first one had tons of red flags, and And again, I share this from a perspective. I know a lot of people judge if you've
Mhm.
never been in something, and it's like the default is to say like, oh, like that's so dumb, or why didn't you see that? Why didn't you do anything?
Yeah.
But you have to
But
realize that if someone has a vulnerability,
yeah.
like myself, looking for love, looking for
Mhm.
companionship, it's so easy to believe, that that's not a red flag and want to believe the best in people. But we met for our first date at a fancy restaurant, and just the cerebral kind of, conversation was flowing, right? And I think he realized that about me, like that would be
Yeah.
a way to get me.
Sure.
And by the end of dinner, so within 2 hours, I've never had anyone track this about me before ever.
Mhm.
And I work in IT. There's tons of neurodiverse people there, right?
Mhm.
Like that's a very common place.
Mhm.
And by the end of the 2 hours, he looked at me. He just kind of like changed his body language a little, got serious. And he's like, you're on the spectrum, huh? And I was shocked. Like, sure, like I work in a field where
Right.
people are on
Well, yeah, a
all the
lot of people on the
things, right?
spectrum.
And
Yeah.
it's normal, but I've never had someone a stranger within 2 hours.
Yeah.
And I
It's
was
kind
kind
of
of
bold.
taken back.
He's bold too.
I was kind of taken back, and he said, oh, no, it's okay. I have friends that are on the spectrum. Like he made me feel seen and safe,
Right.
which now I know was such a predatory move, right? And I feel like if you look at predatory individuals as a whole, they're very skilled at sniffing out
Oh yeah.
the things, right?
They're reading you from the start.
Yeah. And later he had acknowledged that blonde spectrum women are his type.
Oh gosh.
So like that's a thing for people. I've later learned that people fetishize.
Oh, so when he asked if you're on the spectrum, he wanted you to validate because that was going to be a turn on for him. Oh yeah, she's like just my type.
To take someone's disability.
What did you say when he asked you?
Yeah, like I was confused. Like how do you
Like how'd you know?
How do you know this?
Because that's his type.
Yeah. And
wow.
So after dinner, we went to take, separate Ubers back, and the streets are just kind of like pretty still. It's late at night, and there was cobblestone where I was at, and I had heels on, boots, and as we were waiting for the Uber, I noticed he started to kind of hip check me. So he would throw his hip weight into me and see me stumble and have to catch my balance. And I'd look at him like,
was this being playful?
It was odd. There was no like playful energy about the whole moment. It was just very efficient. Two people waiting for Ubers to go
to
back.
test to see how like drunk you are or something.
Yeah, like he seemed, in my opinion, to try to gauge if I would speak out. Like, will she
test
say,
your boundaries a little bit.
Yeah, well,
So if you're gonna be like, oh, stop, what are you doing?
Like, what do you call him on it? He wanted to, and at the time, especially, my default is to be, I think, like the way a lot of people are raised, women, to not call someone out and just be small and like tolerate things.
Well, especially on the first date.
Yeah.
Right.
And so that happened. And from there, the other two dates, the highlight from the second, he took me to a restaurant where he's an investor in the restaurant, right?
It impressed you.
Yeah. And the waiter comes over, and I think it's, a waiter. And I quickly realized that it's a head chef. So the head chef is our waiter.
Yeah, that's impressive.
Yeah. And some of the highlights from that were flags.
But that's not really a red flag, that. If he owns a restaurant, he knows the chef.
No. The
I mean, it's a way to impress you, for sure.
Yeah. So he's setting the stage of
I'm
important
special
person. He started to talk about his billionaire friends smuggling drugs into vacations, like bragging about it.
His billionaire friends. That's already a big brag.
Yeah. And
so what were they doing? They were smuggling drugs into what?
Vacations. So they would go on fancy vacations, and they would smuggle drugs internationally into their vacations. And that was like a talking point that like he found entertainment in, to just talk openly.
I know it seems kind of like random.
Yeah. And
didn't this guy have connections to Epstein?
I didn't know it at the time. At second date, I later learned. So all of these sprinklings of billionaire friends doing things that sounded very illegal. at the time I didn't know, is this just someone bragging or lying? But as time went on, I realized, oh
No.
gosh, I get the level of billionaire and multimillionaire circles that
Right. Yeah.
he's actually
I would think it'd be
socially.
true if you're saying that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the other highlight I'd say out of those three, that second dinner, as he's talking about drugs, you know, I said, I don't do drugs, but I'm open-minded, right? Like I was
Right, of course.
curious.
Yeah.
So like, what kind of drugs, what's your drug of choice? What do you
Mm-hmm.
enjoy doing? And he said it was like Molly or ecstasy or something, right? And I said, well, why? Like, why do you pick that one?
Yeah. Was this guy like 25?
Yeah, no, he's 11 years older than me, right? So I was just kind of fascinated, like, what is going
Right.
on? It was just like so much overwhelming information of like, this is so out
Well, a
there.
guy in his 40s or 50s or whatever is
Yeah.
not really dropping Molly all the time.
Yeah, and so I asked him like, why is that your drug of choice?
Yeah.
And he said because it's the closest thing to empathy he can feel.
Oh, that's scary.
Yeah, and I was like mesmerized by it in a way that like I couldn't imagine that someone was self-aware and also completely lacking empathy. Like
So I can only feel empathetic when I'm on E.
yeah, that's the closest thing that he could feel to like human connection or empathy.
Yeah, I mean, I can
Yeah.
see why he would say that, but
Yeah.
it's kind of an odd thing to say to someone that you're romantically involved with.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Did he seem empathetic to you?
no, like
No.
no, like it fit.
So
It
it was a
tracked.
true, yeah,
It tracked. I just had
true
that.
moment.
I think a lot of women might have that concept of like, well, like if I just show him love, if I show him who I am and kindness, like he'll feel something, you know, like not the concept that I could change him or he'll be different, but like, you know,
Yeah,
you
but
just want.
he's pretty narcissistic at this point. Yeah.
Yeah.
All the name dropping and his friends and then smuggling drugs and
yeah. And the highlight I'd say from the third date, he asked for me to tour. So he has multiple homes and he has a fancy, one of the homes, fancy place. And yeah, going on with the theme, you can track that there's a theme. So we go in and, you know, nothing physical's happening. It's like a high school kind of make out, you know, nothing, clothes on, that kind of thing.
Okay. So he's keeping it G-rated for a while.
Yeah. And we were sitting on a couch and I had more confidence then in that moment because I wasn't isolated at that particular time. And I remember he referred to, again, like a high school makeout as molesting me. And I remember I took pause and I said, you need to pick different words with me, right? Like that's not, no.
Well, how did he use it in a sentence?
He referred to making out as molesting, like interchangeably, as if someone
like, let's make out, I want to molest you.
Yeah. And so
yeah, you don't use that word.
That was bizarre. But the thing that I learned later, it was too dark, kind of dimly lit to see. Behind the couch that this was occurring on was a huge poster for Lolita. And so that was
very telling.
Yeah, that was kind of
that's his favorite book.
Foreshadowing of his favorite book and the terminology that he used with me. So from my perspective, I felt like he fetishized being on the spectrum and he saw that naive quality. Like I could be book smart, great at IT, great at art, but like there's a gap. There's a clear gap that I would have in reading signals from men. And I think that's what checked the boxes for him. So yeah, like those were over the top. But I was fascinated at the sense of outside of those creepy moments, outside of saying molesting me and you know, why would I date someone that's doing drugs? You know, all of those things that should be flags. There was a lot of like cerebral connection, right?
Yeah.
And I think that falls into that place of confusion, right? Like abuser might not be abusing 24/7. Like there's obviously something
they're never
that
abusing 24/7.
Yeah, they hooked you with.
It's always the good with the bad, you know, the lovingness with the
And so those were the last times that I ever ate alone with him, went on dates with him. The rest from that point forward was a complete horror show.
So there's a bit of a power imbalance between the two of you.
Oh, totally. One of
did that feel good to you or was that more overwhelming to you?
So I think small things like I sense I think from a perspective of him wanting to plan dates and things like that, like
Yeah, well, that's nice.
that's a
Yeah.
nice way to give someone else, control, right? But it was deeper and darker than that.
So when did it turn dark?
Yeah, so around that time, and keep in perspective, besides being a professor, or having a career, in academia, he was actually someone, if you're looking at IT, is kind of like a hierarchy, right? Like
Oh,
I'm at the
okay.
bottom,
Yeah.
right? Like I've done well. I'm proud of myself and what I've accomplished.
Right, but that's part of the love bombing then. So
Right.
he could help you.
Right. And
Right.
so I'm kind of just an average, everyday
Yeah.
tech person.
Okay.
He's a thought leader in my field, like flies globally, right? One of his best friends, and again, there's this odd theme of important people writing forewords to books. The person that wrote the foreword to his book is like beyond thought leader in my field, right?
Yeah.
And that person has acknowledged publicly, apologized for their associations with Epstein, right? So that's when it started to be like, oh gosh, these aren't lies.
It's funny, I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so after those 3 whirlwind dates, which one last thing I think I'll highlight from that I think could be helpful to other people.
Okay.
On that no empathy date, he said, so do you prefer experiences or things? And again, naively, I thought, oh, this person is like, really wants to get to know who I am. But in reality, he was just kind of social engineering me to see what
works for you,
what would be the best. And, my response was like, I'm not a materials person, like experiences. I want to make memories with someone.
Right.
That was like my answer. I want to make memories with someone.
Yeah.
And so he had that nugget. And so it kind of relates to the next part.
Oh, that's good for a man to know.
Yeah.
Experiences are gifts.
Yeah.
Yeah. How to get to you.
Yeah. And so
what's going to work with you?
I was laid off around that time. It was very strange because, again, working in IT, I just closed a big project. Like everything was going really well. So it was like this shock. Like,
right.
Oh,
so everything so far with this guy has been fine.
Yeah. Like
the dates. I mean, some things are a little weird or
like,
off, but the good outweighed the bad.
Yeah. But
what happened next? How did he begin to isolate you?
Yeah. And so I let him know, like, oh gosh, like this happened. And he said, well, then come to my island.
He's an island too?
Yeah, well, he lives on an island, come to the island compound that he lives on.
He lives on an island, yeah. Okay.
And I didn't think of it from the lens of like, I'm vulnerable. I don't have a job.
Well, you kind of trusted him at this point. It's been a few dates.
Right.
He's a nice guy.
Right. And I think,
nothing creepy, too creepy yet.
How kind is this? Right.
Yeah.
And so he's like, yeah, like come down.
Right.
And so again, I drove across state lines from my home. I'm living in a different state.
Northeast.
Yeah. I crossed multiple state lines, drive about 7 hours.
Oh my gosh.
Park my car. I have to take a ferry for another 40 minutes. And I get there. And as I'm kind of figuring out the logistics, as you would, like if this was normal.
Right.
The thing that struck me was he's like, no Uber. And I kind of took that as like, oh.
No Uber. Well, how are you supposed to get there?
He's like, I'll pick you up.
And okay.
I'm like, I didn't have enough information then to say that was a thing or predatory.
It's just very controlling.
Very controlling. And he wanted to say like, oh, Ubers don't go to his side of the island. And like,
is that true?
There's no even cell service on his side of the island, which I didn't know at the time. So all of these kind of supporting details were just after the fact, right? So I can look at it from the lens of like, no Uber could be like, I want to control you and make sure, but at the time I just thought like, maybe it's a gentleman, I guess.
Yeah, gentleman being generous.
Yeah. And so I got in the car.
It's not wrong for you to think that way.
Yeah. 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 And that's why I feel pretty open to just share it for what it is, because I think it's so easy to judge other people, but that judgment, I think, makes other survivors hesitant to say, hey, I did this, I made this decision, I went here.
Right. Well, you only think of this in hindsight.
Yeah.
Because you could have met a nice, normal guy. and everything would have worked out just perfectly fine
Yeah.
if he wasn't a predator.
Yeah. And,
So that is the difference.
yeah. And so I thought he lived alone, which wasn't the case. And I made
Okay.
a comment, I was raised to bring a gift to someone's home or,
Right.
do that. And I made a joke like, oh, I brought you a bottle of alcohol because I didn't think that you'd want flowers. And he mumbled like, oh, mom would have liked that.
Mm-hmm.
And I was
Okay.
like,
Yeah. You have
what?
manners.
Yeah. And so
Okay.
we drove 40 minutes. And again, in retrospect, I'm basically going 40 minutes, which is the equivalent of 7 to 8 hour walk.
Uh-huh.
Right. So like I was dependent on
Yeah.
him.
You don't know the address because you didn't Uber.
Yeah.
You don't know
And
where you
so
are.
I don't know what the address is. I'm just going along with it. He's taken me, if I were to leave on my own, an 8 hour walk back to a ferry that has a specific schedule. So can I even get off
Oh my goodness.
this
Yeah.
island?
But you're not thinking like that yet.
No. Like,
Yeah. You're just thinking it's a nice
yeah,
date. I'm going to
yeah,
an island. Yeah.
yeah. And so
Meeting a guy. You liked him at this point.
yeah, like
Yeah.
I was very intrigued by the cerebral connection. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so we pull up, and one of the things that struck me, a very private drive, and there was CCTV
Mm-hmm.
on kind of like a compound fence, and I was
Right.
like,
Okay.
okay,
This is very
yeah,
high
like,
tech.
and so we get inside, and again, I think he lives alone, and so I have just kind of a casual beach outfit on, and
Alone being not married.
yeah, like,
Yeah. Of course.
and so again, I think this is a indicator like broadly for predators or predatory behavior. If someone's rushing you through something, not letting you make decisions, not giving you all the information up front, like there's probably a reason for that, right? And so he's like, put your bag down, put your bag down. Let's go meet mom.
Mom.
And I was like, what? I'm not dressed to meet a mom. I don't have flowers. And so, oh, it's fine. It's fine. And so he like rushes me into, he had a separate wing in the home, into where his mom was at in the living area. And, we exchanged niceties. And then they had a side conversation in front of me. And she said, oh, which one is this? And he's like, oh, this is the one from, and he did a recap. And I thought, that's bizarre.
Yeah.
And
So is that what you meant by he didn't live alone? He met with his mom.
Yeah, but it wasn't, there's the how adorable you love your mom.
Yeah.
There
Yeah.
was this wasn't that.
No, some weird weird thing going on.
If from looking on the outside in, if you didn't know the dynamics, you would almost think that they were a couple. Yeah, that was the vibe. And
yeah, controlling mother probably.
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
and it just spiraled from there. So it was basically a series of extreme highs and extreme fear, like intentionally. It felt like they were running a playbook, basically. And so leaning into that sense of, oh, do you like experiences? You like memories?
Right.
So he says, we'll go to the beach and watch a sunset. And he does all the things, the blanket and all that. And it was,
Okay.
great. And so I started to kind of like ignore that gut sense of like, why was his mom saying, which girl is that?
Yeah, that's weird.
Right. And I'm like, maybe this will be normal.
It's kind of rude to say that.
Yeah. And so he says, let's go make dinner. I have this and this. And I think, oh, great. Like he's going to cook me a romantic dinner. And we get inside and he gives me what he would call assignments. So basically, I would cook with him and we would cook a romantic dinner for his mom. And he would sit me in between them. Like, and
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to laugh, but
yeah.
this is ridiculous.
Yeah. And it was not like her courting me in a sense of like, oh, this could be my future daughter-in-law, or like, I want to like be overly bad boundary involved.
Right.
It felt like a game to them, like a very sick game. And so I'm trying to process all of this. And so on the second night, he's like, you want to go do the beach sunset? And I'm kind of like just dizzy at this point of like, what's happening?
Right.
And
well, you fast forward to the second night.
Yeah.
So the first night, everything was fine.
Well, it was a series of like gotchas, almost like romantic dinner. Oh, like your mom's there, the same person that wants to know which girl is this, like kind of bizarre. And I just started.
So the mom never left the whole night?
No, I never ate alone with him again after those first 3
Right.
dates. She did movies with us. She did everything.
This is really, isn't this strange? Did you ever be like, this is strange?
Oh yeah, I was so creeped out by it. Like you could sense, I couldn't articulate the reason that, besides the power imbalance and him being in my field and being
Right.
intimidated by, like, you know, if I'd gone through the roofie rape and saw that like power and status can
Right.
influence the media
Mhm.
or potentially the justice system,
Mhm.
like,
Well, some of these
you
men who
know,
are very controlling had very controlling mothers.
yeah,
Yeah. And there's sometimes a weird relationship going on.
incredibly.
Yeah. But I mean, this is getting very
Yeah,
strange.
it gets worse. So the second night he says, you know, you want to do the beach sunset. And at
Uh-huh.
that point, I'm just kind of grasping for anything that would be like,
Yeah. Finally, by just the two of us.
yes, like, can we,
Yeah.
yes. And so he packs up the things, and then I notice his mom's going with us. Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah. But it gets worse. He gets an extra beach chair. And so he sets out the same thing, the same deal, the blanket, you
Uh-huh.
know, but he puts his mom disturbingly close right behind me. And so
Okay.
I felt so uncomfortable. I didn't want to try to touch him lovingly. Like, this was
Yeah.
just so bizarre. And I didn't want to say anything. And so the third night, same thing. You want to go to the beach? And at this point, I'm kind of just traumatized. Like, I don't know what to expect.
You're like, I'm done with this.
He's like creating a climate of like never knowing what the next thing is. Like,
Right.
he had this delight in kind of like tricking me or deceiving me.
Yeah. I
It
was
was like a
thinking
game.
it's a game.
Yeah,
Like
a
he's
sick,
playing around
twisted
with you.
game. It wasn't just someone aloof being like,
No.
oh, I live with my
It
mom
seems-
and this is my reality. Because like,
No. It's
I've
more
dated men like
calculated.
that have their mom living at home, and I think that's sweet and it's
Yeah.
healthy and it's
Yeah, it
cute,
can
but this
be.
was not that.
Mm-hmm.
And so we ended up at the beach that night by ourselves, which
Okay.
started to feel like a treat. Like,
Okay.
oh wow. And out of nowhere, he said, so mom likes you better than the others. And I was shocked, and I was like, what does that mean?
Mom gets to choose.
And he said, I said, why? What? The others? You know, like,
Yeah.
because I go into this thinking that this is a single man that I have this kind of love bomby over the top connection with that's kind of fabricated, I guess, at this point,
Right.
intentional. And now there's like a normalizing of other women or other people in it, you know. So I'm like in shock, like, what is that? I don't understand. Why? What?
What'd he say?
And he said, she likes you better than the others because you're quiet and you don't talk a lot.
You don't ask a lot of questions.
Yeah. And so then it progressively got worse. Basically, at that point, as I would go back, like, he would basically, it wasn't like, the other thing I think to highlight was during my time there, it wasn't like, oh, you're laid off, so like, let's go do this concert and let's go do
Right.
this. He kept me in his bedroom the entire time. It wasn't as if I had free reign to just go explore the house or like if I had to go outside, I had to ask his permission.
Wow.
Right. And you think of the CCTV everywhere. And
When you say CCTV, you mean the cameras everywhere.
Right. Cameras.
Right.
And
so you can be standing in one room, you can see the cameras and what's going on in other rooms.
I don't know where their kind of like base camp of camera setup was, but I do know one morning he had a very ritual life while I was there. Like, I had to abide by his rules and his timeline, right? There was no like consent, no mutual buy-in of how I wanted my time to be.
Right.
And that was everything from something as simple as coffee to physical.
Right.
Like, there was lack of consent across all of those. And one morning when we went in to get coffee with his mother, which was always just so kind of at this point disturbing, she has this flirtatious banter with him. And she said, you were a very bad boy last night. And I thought, oh my gosh, like, is she just watching what's happening in his bedroom?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And
But who talks to their child that way? I mean, their son that way.
yeah, like, you could mistake, there was no motherly physical interaction. It was
So
part competitive and part
competitive.
flirty.
Yes, it's competitive. Yeah, but what did he say after she said that?
Oh, they just laughed. They just had all these moments together, and it just felt very, very very calculated. I felt like they were running a playbook.
It's almost like, they're trying to creep you out.
Yeah. And enjoy it at the same time. And so there's all this rigid rules. At a certain point, I start to realize I'm not dating this guy. There's other women here. And I start to question it, right?
Right.
Like,
did you say anything?
no, because it was a similar dynamic of like, I already know, like specifically my career field, he's the top of the food chain.
Well, so there must have been something about him that you still found intriguing, or
yeah,
you still had a connection.
I tried to hyper focus on the concept of like, oh, like again, abusers don't abuse 24/7, right?
Right.
So like,
yeah, of course they don't.
there's little cerebral
Right.
moments, and you know, if you look at the time on the beach without the
Mhm.
mom, you know, I just clung to anything. It got to the point to where again, I wasn't eating alone with him. So if he made me a little snack at lunch, I thought he was like the greatest guy,
Right.
right?
Right.
But so I start to realize there's other women. He's normalizing that. And then as time went on, he started to make threats, right?
So how long did you stay there?
So I was there for basically on like when he would text me, I would make this whole drive down
Oh,
for an
okay. 'Cause
entire
you guys are in a
summer.
you were in a full on relationship.
I don't know if I would categorize it as a relationship because there wasn't consent from a perspective of I would never sign up to date someone that had
Right.
openly other women rotating through their life, right? But I
Did
didn't.
he ever say that was true? Like that?
Yeah, like
Oh,
he
would
talked about all the other
all the
women
time.
often. Like he normalized. And you start to question yourself, right?
Yeah,
like
exactly.
like he thinks it's normal. It's not something that I signed up for. But so one night in particular, as I was going there before I got on the ferry, this was really intense. So over time, he starts to be specific about these billionaires, and he starts to talk about. So basically, when Epstein rehabilitated himself and his image after Florida,
You mean like 2008?
yeah, he took an academia route, right?
Yeah.
And so this person's was there during that timeline of academia rebranding. And he starts specifically telling me stories of this person that he knows that did this thing for Epstein. And like that became, again, another normalizing part, but it was terrifying because it wasn't just there's this weird dynamic with why does his mom, she's okay with women running through this place, right? It's also like, oh gosh, like Epstein. And so I thought, what do you do with that? So as this was building up, he had spent 2 days at a retreat on the island, and again another Epstein circle person, and he had texted me a picture as I was about to get on the ferry of him with a former president and first lady, and I was like, what, you know? And he's like, oh, I'll tell you when you get here. And so when I got there, I asked him, you know, what's the story, what happened? And he said he stayed up drinking all night with not even like, you know, the respect or the like former president, you know, the like the way that you would think someone would be like, wow, I had such an honor to do this. It was just like we were drinking buddies.
Right.
And I remember pausing and saying, and again, I've worked in little bits of like cybersecurity and different things. I know a little sprinkling of things, right? I've worked with former government folks. And so I said, well, what was that like drinking with them all night?
Yeah.
It's like with Secret Service. And he paused and he was like, I didn't really notice him. And so this just up leveled everything.
Right.
Right. So it wasn't just he's kind of a quirky guy that maybe lives with his mom and they have bad boundaries. Like you look at the facts of it based on what I was experiencing, what they were saying, like there's other women. I'm on an island. I'm isolated. So if I were to say, no thanks, if I were brave enough to say all of these people that you're friends with, you know, I'm not going to second guess that, which clearly that's scary. I would have to walk 7 to 8 hours on foot to get to the only way to get off of that place, right? And so the sprinkling of intimidation and threats continued. We were in his jacuzzi. He had again a very ritual thing. He wanted to sit in his jacuzzi every night, and he extended my arm, and I was confused a little bit. And he showed me, if I just press these 2 to 3 places, I can break your arm. And it was like, and again, he had that same delight that he had when he kind of hip checked me at the restaurant. Like he was just like enjoying it. And then he extended my left leg, and he showed me, if I just, touch these 2, 3 places, I know jujitsu, so I can break your leg.
Wow.
And
That's a way of silently controlling you.
Oh,
because then you have that fear in you. Like
absolutely.
he's almost telling you, well, I'll hurt you.
Absolutely. And in between all of this, like this is intentional too.
Yeah. No, it's very
I think it's
intentional.
all psychological
Oh, yeah.
manipulation and grooming. He would refer to himself as a predator and me as the prey. He would be the bear and I was a salmon.
A lot of predators do that.
He was the orchid, I was the air. He was the lion, I was the gazelle. And so after the
all situations of prey.
yeah,
like
after
a
the
predator
moment
and prey.
after the moment of showing me how he could break my legs, he started in on the predator prey. And I remember I had the courage to say, like, stop, please, like that's scaring me. Stop saying that. And he laughed, which is such a odd reaction. And he said, I'm just a 12-year-old boy inside. And they said, no, wait, they don't like girls yet. I'm just a 14-year-old boy inside. And I say those things to impress you. And again, there was like a normalizing of it, right? Like on one hand, he's like, hey, I can break your leg.
He knew he went too far, so he had to like make it playful.
Yeah. And so
did he ever talk about the underage girls?
At one point, he tried to get me to recruit young women to his island.
Yeah, because I was saying if he's friends with that whole crew, that's kind of what they did.
His pitch was recruit them and we can corrupt them together.
What?
Yeah, corrupt was, he had such specificity with the words, whether it's molesting.
Right.
And so while I was basically in his bedroom the entire 3 days that I would stay there, like the doors wouldn't open. I would try to leave and I couldn't open the doors, right? And so I saw on his nightstand at one point, academia, like books and all of that. And at one point, like my knees gave out a little bit, like when I read it. It was titled something to the extent of teenage romance stories. And so kind of all the flags and things are starting to go off for me, that I'm like, wow, like Lolita's his favorite book. Who puts a huge poster that takes up a good part of the wall.
Same with Jeffrey, Lolita Island.
Yeah.
Everything is like eerily similar.
Yeah. Yeah. And
the way they think.
His social circle. And then I'd say the last kind of highlight of threats or intimidation, he had an interview, academia type interview. He was looking for an assistant basically the next day. And this is the same night where he's bragging about drinking with the president and calling him by the first name, which is, to me, is just so wild, right? It's scary. And so he had a tendency to be even more kind of, call it honest or oversharing when he was drinking. And I asked him about his interview the next day, and he said, yeah, he likes to hire ex-Israeli special forces because they do great research for him and can kill someone for him in the same day.
Wow.
And he just made direct eye contact with me as if like he just put me on notice. Like, if you haven't figured it out by now, like I hope that one landed.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like his subtle ways of telling you things.
Yeah.
Yeah. How are you feeling in this moment?
Just like in shock.
Like terrified?
Yeah. I felt like the only survival mechanism I had at the time was just to kind of appease him. Like, don't piss him off. Because he knows how to break my leg and he knows people that can kill people. And he's buddies with a former president and his friends are billionaires.
Mom's not going to say anything.
Mom's in on whatever this is, right? And so I would continue to go down there. And when I would go down, I would text my friends and I'm like, if you don't hear from me, like I didn't have cell service either. The cell service dropped when he went to his compound gates. And so I'm like, if you don't hear from me in 3 days, like call the cops. Like it was like that. I was going down in that state of no consent, right? Like I was going because what was the alternative, right? Like it's so scary.
Yeah, you were under his control.
Yeah.
Well, let's unpack that, the ways that he controlled you.
Yeah. So I think some of the highlights that could be beneficial to other people, like this is my story, but I think it's not
Yeah.
specific or individualized to me.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah,
The way you would dress.
the strict routines. So I had to get up and have coffee. I had to go on beach walks when he wanted to go. Like I couldn't go outside. I had to ask for permission. If I dressed, just how I felt like I wanted to dress, he would make fun of me. And it wasn't a playful, if you're in a relationship and you kind of tease each other, like he would look at me with disgust just for wearing Birkenstock sandals because they weren't feminine or sexy. Like he had a hang up that like I needed to be sexy, whatever that meant at all times. Right. So controlling when I could eat, when I could sleep, controlling physically the space. Again, this wasn't a vacation at a, vacation.
So if you're like sleeping in the morning, it's like, nope, time to get up.
Oh yeah. If I stayed in bed, 10, 15 minutes after the moment he got up, he would call me a sloth or, fill in the blanks. Like it was that. So
that's horrible.
Yeah, it was a sprinkling of all of those things. And then I'd say the other highlight, which I think could relate to other people or women experiencing this, the controlling. So I was trying to interview like crazy, and I found an opportunity, a really interesting opportunity to work for a startup. But it was part-time, but I was happy to, take it for the potential. And I remember sharing that with him, and he said no. And at first I kind of thought it was just like, if you tell your friend something, they have like a knee-jerk reaction.
Right.
And then I said, well, I'm this. And he said, no.
No.
And I realized, oh, okay.
Oh,
and
he controls what job you get.
And so I think that's a common flag for other people to look out for. But
so he probably didn't want you working at all.
He wanted me to work for his circle. So the two options that he gave me were to, he wanted to give my resume to his VC friend.
Okay.
Which the VC friend is also a billionaire that's at the top of this chain, right? And so if I would have done that, he would have known where I was traveling, where I was working, my every move, right? And so I was trying to make space, right? Like I actively knew this whole situation was dangerous, but like at the same time, if PD let me down for a roofie rape with surveillance video, like, are they going to help me? That was unfortunately the worldview that I had. And so I was trying to make space and not give him my resume, right? And I think a lot of people would look at it like, oh, you had this opportunity, just go do the thing, but no, like I knew that he would have more control and power and it would get even scarier, right? And so I was trying to build space and say, like, I need to edit my resume. And I thought maybe I should just acknowledge, like, that's really nice of you. Like, I didn't want to piss him off. Like, he's a scary guy, right? And I said, that's really nice of you. And he said, oh, it's not nice. It's just a good business decision. And he just stared at me to like, let me know, like, again, he doesn't have any empathy. He's not doing this to be a kind.
No.
I wouldn't even call it a boyfriend situation at that point because there's actively other women in his orbit, right?
Yeah.
And then the other option was to get my art. So I mentioned I'm good at art and IT. He introed me to a very, very large household name, I'll just say, company. And he did direct intros. I saw the way that these executives responded back to him. And I saw the tone in the email. Like you could tell that this guy, their tone validated all the fear that I had because as an executive working in IT, again, the way that executives speak to each other wasn't that. This guy clearly was like,
feared.
Sure. Like, yeah, I'll do it. It wasn't like hey, I'll do you a favor. It was like, he was just going
Like whatever
on
you
and
say.
on and on about how great he was and how it was this and that. And basically, if I would have taken that, he wanted a 10 to 20% cut of all of the art that I sold.
Oh, yeah.
And so my two options were either make a different kind of art that isn't my style, that isn't what makes me happy, to make him more money off of a contact that he already has. And for what it's worth, the executive of that large company has historical ties with Epstein as well. So the two
Wow.
options were people in this orbit of Epstein, which are words I never thought that would ever be in my vocabulary, right? Like I knew the same sprinkling that most of the world did from the news, but I certainly never thought that I would encounter this in real life.
Yeah, because he's also deep into the art world.
Yeah.
Like they can really help you, I'm
Yeah.
sure. So I can see
Yeah.
why that would be enticing.
Yeah. All the things. And I'd say another highlight was he tried to pressure me into doing OnlyFans.
Really?
Yeah. Like he
That's like
pitched
out
it
of
like
left
it would be a
field.
great idea. And he kept saying, like, why won't you do it? Why won't you do it? And I was like, videos.
Was he more specific? Like just showing your toes, or was he?
He was just pitching
That's almost like pimping you
business.
out.
Yeah, the business model of how great it is and how much money you can make. And I remember saying, like, no, like that, no, like it's fine if someone wants to do that, right? But like, not no. And then he kind of
Well, that would almost make you think like, oh, this man doesn't care about me.
no, and so he started as a way to kind of pressure me more so as I pushed back. Again, there were very few times that I had the guts to say no because I was scared, but that was a hard line for me, right?
Right.
And
I'm surprised he'd want you to do that.
and so he said, well, what if like your nude picture, like he had nude pictures of me at that point. What if your nude pictures got out? It wasn't like I'm going to dox you or I'm going to send this to the internet if you don't do it, but it was implied. Like all these were just very layered, implied threats.
Oh, if you don't do it, I'll do it for you.
Yeah. And then you compound that with the sense that he had CCTV in his house. Like, was he already filming?
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Everything to begin with.
Well, I was going to ask you about that because most of those types of men are very controlling with their sex life.
Oh yeah, totally.
But I mean, are you comfortable saying like what he was controlling about regarding that?
Yeah. So every time, again, following along with the no consent, I mean, everything from what I would eat down to anything that was physical. And I know that it's oftentimes hard or confusing if people get into, especially with traffickers or, they think that they're in love or they think that they're having a relationship. So they think something that was sex all of a sudden becomes rape, like those two things can coexist. Right. But as I would go down there, he had everything physical from his sense pre-planned, but I had no opt-in, no communication. He was basically just living out fantasies that were in his head on me.
Right.
At one point, I told him, no, I don't like that. And he continued. Like that's the hallmark of what rape is, right? To say, no, I don't want that. And to have someone still
not to care.
Not care. Like I was clearly an object. And I remember in one of these moments, he stopped abruptly. And I said, I was confused. It was weird.
Yeah.
And he said, so what's wrong? And he said, I can't get the scene right.
Scene?
Yeah. And you think of, you have cameras in your house and you can't get a scene right. Like, what are you doing?
No, it's probably the scene that he saw in his head, like from a porno or something like that. And that he wants to act out.
And as this progressed, at one point, so this kind of goes back to our third date. I didn't highlight this, but he took me to a isolated location that wasn't the fancy house with the Lolita poster where I thought we were going. He'd like to change things up, right? And I remember asking him, like, whose apartment is this? Anyways, it was weird. It was like staged. It didn't feel like anyone lived there. And he said, don't worry, you're a smart girl. It'll all come together soon enough. And like, that kind of feels like right out of a horror movie, right? But like, you don't want to believe that someone's,
That's a weird answer.
And so fast forward, the reason I shared that was as time goes on and all this stuff is just unpacking, like Epstein circles and
Mm-hmm.
other women, and it just seems like he's running a eerily similar playbook, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
he lets me into. We had gone on a motorcycle ride, and at one point he had crashed his motorcycle with me on it. I was bruised. He
Oh
told me
my
I couldn't
gosh.
tell his mom. So I was like, if I can't tell his
Don't tell
mom,
my mom.
I can't call the cop. Like I just had this layered because
Wait a
of
minute. You get in an accident, and the first thing that he says is, "Don't tell my mom."
yeah, yeah, yeah. Like
He just,
it's
it's almost like
twisted.
he's right. He's still like a 14-year-old
Yeah,
boy.
it's twisted. But when we got back from one of these motorcycle rides, he let me in through the mudroom, and it was like a gut punch. He opens the door, and there's these huge server racks,
Server racks.
servers.
Uh-huh.
And so I've worked in IT for a long time. I used to sell hardware. And so I've walked
Mm-hmm.
data centers. And so like,
Mm-hmm.
I know like it's something that it might not be like common normal to some people, but like it's something I'm familiar with. Right. And the reason that it punched me in the gut was like, I did the math quickly. And even if he had, a great sound system and CCTV equipment, this was like major.
Well, what is it?
Like, so potentially, I don't know if this is the case, but if you look at like Diddy or some of the other
Mm-hmm.
predatory people that also
Mm-hmm.
have access to wealth,
Mm-hmm.
that allows them to say they were recording CCTV footage.
Mm-hmm.
They can keep that at home, right?
Mm-hmm.
They can tunnel into the dark web,
Mm-hmm.
right? They can put that content on the dark web.
Mm-hmm.
They could live stream whatever they were into. And so in that moment I thought, oh gosh, like he did tell me that this would all come together soon enough, and like I'd get it. And so again, it's not as if I had access to the
Right.
servers and knew exactly what he kept on there,
Right. He was recording
but
everything.
the combination of other women in his orbit, the
Yeah.
Epstein social circle,
Mm-hmm.
the very odd dynamic of like his mom would pay. They do a weird hand signal on dates, and mom would pay. He would refer to his mom as his CFO. It was almost like she had this kind of like part in a playbook, right?
It's so funny you say that because the guy that I speak about from
Mm-hmm.
the Northeast too,
Mm-hmm.
not similar circles, but he also had a very controlling mother who was
Mm-hmm.
the CFO of his
Oh wow.
commercial real estate
Wow.
company, and she like controlled everything about
Wow.
him.
Yeah.
So really kind of a, I gotta do more research on this, what
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
parallel is with the mom and
Yeah.
mm-hmm. That is so
It was so
creepy.
intense that like I would call. I remember I have two guy friends who kind of like stayed with me through this, and
Yeah.
I needed someone to say like, what do you think? Because I always think like maybe
Yeah,
there's a
yeah,
perspective
exactly.
I'm missing, or
I used
is
to do
this
that too.
normal?
Ask guys, like, is this a normal thing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember towards the end I called one of my guy friends. We were on the phone for like 2 hours at like midnight, and I was just like crying. I'm like, I don't know what to do. And he was like, just block your number.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, but I can't. Like, he's in
Mm-hmm.
my field, and he knows all
Mm-hmm.
these people.
Yeah.
And he told me that he can break my legs, and he knows people that can kill people for him.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was just like, I think this is my life. I think I'm just stuck with him until he's done with my body. Like, that was the place I
Aw.
got to.
Yeah.
So I had another guy friend that was kind of with me through this, and he was very patient.
Mm-hmm.
His mom's a retired therapist. And,
Mm-hmm.
one day he got really, he wasn't involved in telling me what to do. Like my other guy friend was like,
Mm-hmm.
just get out of there, block the number, things that weren't like constructive, right? And so finally he said, I think you have Stockholm syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
And I laughed it off because that's my default of like a wild
Mm-hmm.
statement is a joke. And he was basically like, I need you to listen to
Yeah.
me. Like I legitimately think that you should research that
Mm-hmm.
and, respect him and care about him. And
Mm-hmm.
so I started to research it. And then even like a surface level, like page one of Google, just
Mm-hmm.
like what is Stockholm? And then you look at the intersection of trafficking in Stockholm, and it's just that same playbook. And
Mm-hmm.
I clearly
Yeah, it's a
didn't
real thing.
go that deep right out of the gates, but there was enough
Mm-hmm.
perspective, enough like tangible
Mm-hmm.
stuff for
Mm-hmm.
that light bulb to go off and be
Mm-hmm.
like, oh gosh, I think he's right.
Yeah, you needed someone to point that out
Yeah.
to you.
Yeah. And that was, I acknowledged that as the only reason that I was eventually able to exit,
Mhm.
because I was stuck in a place of, I'm just going to have to go down there every time he texts me, and I'm going to have to sit in his room for 3 days. And,
Mhm.
um, yeah, like all of the things,
Mhm.
right?
So how did you eventually get out of it?
Yeah. So I was able to break through. I think similar, there's some commonalities between like people leaving cults or trafficking
Right. Yeah.
situations, right? So I started to get a little bit of education, and um, I was scared. I didn't know what to do. I was
Mhm.
very like scared just all the time. And it just felt like his world and my career and all, like he
Right.
just touched every part of my world.
Yeah.
And I reached out to a domestic violence
Oh, good.
resource center that I
Mhm.
had some trust in, I knew.
Mhm.
Um, and they listened to kind of the high level. Um, and one of the things I forgot earlier was the first 2 visits that I went down there, he left money out,
Mhm.
large amounts of money,
Mhm.
which I just thought like, it,
Well, yeah, well, it's also almost to silence you.
yeah,
Like,
in like what I learned from that conversation too, or through advocacy
mhm.
conversations, is it's very common in trafficking situations, like to exchange money in that way, like to
Mhm.
just leave
Leave it there.
money out. And so basically they heard kind of the highlights, the isolation, the other
Mhm.
women, the death
Mhm.
threats, the crossing state lines, all the
Mhm.
things. And they said, hey, there's a trafficking resource center, like you should call them. I remember being like, no, like that's no, like
Yeah.
my perspective was like trafficking, very ignorant. Trafficking happens at the border, and like
Right.
there's like vans, whatever you
Mhm.
see in the movies. And so the only reason I reached out was because I trusted that person, but I didn't
Mhm.
believe
If
like
that
their
was you, your
read.
situation,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so I ended up spending 4 hours that day with the trafficking advocate.
Mhm.
She's like, that's trafficking. I
Mhm.
still had like denial, like, no,
Yeah.
that's people. And no, she's like, no, that's that. And so
Mhm.
basically she helped me make space, and he texted me while I was there. And so she helped me craft a like, sorry, I
Oh,
can't. And so I basically started to try to distance myself, which is
right.
very scary. And the more I distanced myself, the more
Yeah, he was pushing back.
aggressively
Yeah.
pursuing
Mhm.
me.
Yeah, 'cause it's the first time,
Yeah. Yeah.
that you were actually pushing back and having
Yeah.
boundaries with him.
Yeah. And
And so in the beginning, he was not cool with it. And
hmm
was he making any threats or?
no threats. But he would say if I was in the next state over for work,
Mhm.
um, he would say, at this point, I'm like not physically in person with him, but still text communicating, because I was
Right.
scared to just,
Yeah, to cut it off cold
yeah,
turkey.
it was
Yeah.
scary. And uh, so all of a sudden he was in the city instead of his island. And all of a sudden it wasn't
Mm,
as if, oh, hey, do you want to meet Friday? It was like,
I'm here.
hey, I'm here Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. What day do you
Mhm.
want to hang out?
So now you're not going to him, but now he's
Yeah.
in your city.
And he's giving me situations where I can't say no,
No.
basically, right?
Yeah, he's making it so easy.
Yeah. And so the turning point for me where I finally had enough courage to go entirely no contact, as I'm trying to just back away slowly, but
Mhm.
also like, how does this even work?
Yeah.
Like his friends are in the Epstein circle. Like, how
Yeah.
does this work? This is so terrifying. I didn't
Mhm.
sign up for any of this. If he would
Yeah.
have said that,
No, that wasn't the relationship you were looking for.
no. And in between all of those sprinklings of things, he would allude to the fact that he worked with the CIA, like just wild stuff that, like, I don't know. He was honest about
Mhm.
so I don't know, where's the
Yeah.
line, right? But what drove me to say, no, I don't care, was I made the connection. One of his homes is online, like on the internet. And I was like trying to just put it all together. At this point, I had already Googled the names of the people, and I'm like, oh, yeah, they actually are in an Epstein circle publicly.
Mhm.
That's scary. And I found his public picture of that couch where he said that he was molesting me. And I saw a huge Lolita poster over it.
Mhm.
And then I found a old Twitter, which was like his what's your most favorite reads? Lolita, like all the, it was just like all of those
Yeah.
things,
Mm-hmm.
the recruiting women,
Mm-hmm.
you know, young, all that. Like there were too
Yeah, it
many
was too
flags
much.
for me. Like I still
Yeah.
was scared for myself and in
Right.
denial, but there were too many obvious
Mm-hmm.
indicators that
Mm-hmm.
whatever that was
Yeah.
wasn't good.
No, it's not good.
And yeah, so I at that point I tried to ask the trafficking organization if I could go to the cops because I was scared. I didn't want to go to the cops. I didn't think that they were going to
Yeah.
do anything based on what
What
happened
happened
before.
before? Yeah.
But I wanted I wanted to be on someone's radar in case something happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just, yeah. Make sure it's documented.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so I received a lot of just more trauma, ironically. Like, again,
Mm-hmm.
it's that naive perspective that, like, you have a
Mm-hmm.
bad thing happen and then it's like Law and
Mm-hmm.
Order SVU and you get a
Yep.
blanket and everyone's warm and fuzzy. It wasn't that.
Mm-hmm.
I'd brought up the roofie rape just and I'm just like downloading all of my
Right.
trauma, you know, and they didn't believe me. They were like,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, like we're gonna need proof of your rape." And I'm
Right.
like, do you need an email from a detective? Here's news
Right.
reports. Like, what do
Right.
you need? So there's just this bizarre like
Mm-hmm.
pushback of like you would
Mm-hmm.
think that if someone was brave enough to come say
Mm-hmm.
the things, you would help them. But
Yeah.
so I faced all these barriers,
Right.
and eventually they had a they coordinated a law enforcement person to
Mm-hmm.
come down. They didn't show me a badge. They didn't show me a name card. Um, they took all of my documentation because I was trying to print
Mm-hmm.
things off of my phone at this point to say like,
Right.
here's kind of
Yeah.
all the scary elements that I've
Mm-hmm.
encountered. Um, and so like from that perspective, I don't know
Mm-hmm.
how a law enforcement report at that level is supposed to
Mm-hmm.
go, but I did think it was strange that like no one, you
Right.
know, like it's just weird, right? But again, I'm trusting. And
Did you relate it at that point to the app?
yeah, so at that point, I had shared. That was the other thing that kind of happened in parallel. I started to realize while the app looked legitimate on the face,
Mm-hmm.
there were these private sub chats,
Right.
and there were women, even the advocacy people that were not great
Mm-hmm.
to me, saw it and they're like, "Oh yeah, that girl's very young and that
Mm-hmm.
girl's bruised, and
Mm-hmm.
those women look trafficked." So I had all of this like background information of like, how is it now? Like I'm just connecting all the
Mm-hmm.
dots. You know, I think it's like lightning with this one person. And now I
Mm-hmm.
realize, oh my gosh, like
Mm-hmm.
this is happening
Mm-hmm.
frequently. This is a thing. And I had no context of what trafficking was barely then. But the highlight after I reported everything about the app. I reported both men. Again, one guy's crossing state lines with like documentation of
Yeah.
assault. The other, I have documentation. I have documentation of the app. A couple of weeks later, this person says, "Oh, there's nothing there."
Mm-hmm.
And I thought,
Right.
that's strange because I actually, you know, like
Right. Gave you all that stuff.
all the
Yeah.
things. And this person would never let me interact with her directly. I always
Mm-hmm.
had to go through an agency. Like it was a
Mm-hmm.
very bizarre situation. And I, roughly 2 weeks after I reported everything, again, I'm living very, I wouldn't say off the grid, but I lived in a
Mm-hmm.
very remote part of a state
Mm-hmm.
alone.
Right.
And it wasn't a city where if this happened in a city, I think you could kind of brush it off to
Right.
the chaos, but
Mm-hmm.
I started getting stalked,
Mm-hmm.
not by any individual that
Mm-hmm.
I recognized, right? But I started getting followed, and it wasn't, you know, people say like
Was someone to silence you? Was it they're just trying to
it was
scare
just
you?
the strangest timing, right? It wasn't it when I would get followed, it wasn't it was so obvious. Like they would drive behind me erratically,
Mm-hmm.
they would flash their
Wow.
headlights.
So maybe like he hired someone to scare you?
It felt very, very organized.
Right.
And it started to increase in frequency where like I couldn't even go out, you know,
Mm-hmm.
40 minutes to a grocery store without having it happen. And I was meticulous about documenting it. all too, because
Yeah,
after
so
having
strange.
gone through the system, I knew the only way that anyone would believe me is
Right.
if I'm like, here's video of it, here's this, here's that.
So this started right after you
Try to report to law
try to report
enforcement.
it.
And
So maybe it got back to him.
yeah. And so the interesting part is, as this is just like escalating, I'm withdrawing from all my friends because I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is
Yeah,
so scary.
you don't know
And
what to do. You're scared.
so I called the human trafficking hotline and I met with
Mhm.
an advocate that was incredibly well versed. She had been in
Mhm.
the space for 20, 30 years. And I described everything to her. And then she had supported a high profile, I'll just
Mhm.
put it that way, a trafficking case. And she said the way that you're describing the stalking is exactly the way this particular very high profile person, what they did to their victim
Oh,
survivor. And so like it all clicked for
wow.
her. She tried to assemble a jump team
Right.
to like help me. It took
Mhm.
72 hours. She told me to shelter in place for 72 hours,
Oh my,
not leave the house.
yeah.
Very scary. And so it wasn't working. I had no food.
Mhm.
Like I couldn't leave.
Mhm.
Just terrifying, right? And eventually I called my stepdad and I said, "Can you fly out here? You know, this is like crazy.
Right.
Like this is
Yeah.
scary."
Yeah.
I had someone like jump out of a car and walk towards me, filming me, like aggressive. It wasn't like something where if you were, I even went to the extent of if I thought maybe someone was following me, I'd make, they say make 3 or 4 turns.
Yeah.
I would do that and they would still be following me. Like
Right.
all of the
Was it because
indicators.
you came out in the news? Or
It,
did people know about this? Because
not,
it sounds like the only person it could be is from him.
yeah, the only thing that changed from exiting that situation was when I went to law enforcement with this packet of this is this person, this is this
Right.
person, I'm outing this person, this
Mhm.
person did this. Like,
So,
yeah, that was the only thing that happened. And so the human trafficking hotline basically said,
mhm.
all right, well, if you're going to drive out, it's a federal crime if someone stalks you over state lines. So my stepdad flew out. While I was waiting for him in the airport, I have video of it. One of the car flashing lights, like a little tiny airport in the middle of nowhere, just tons of parking spots, comes up behind me and starts doing that. And my stepdad drives hazmat for a living. He used to be a firefighter.
Right.
So like from my perspective of like cool, calm, collected,
Mhm.
safe, right? Like he's the guy that I want to drive halfway across the country or whatever with, right?
Yeah. Wow, that is so frightening. How long did that go on for?
The
The,
stalking?
the stalking.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was weeks. It was just like it got worse and worse and worse. It was multiple cars. I've documented them all. But so my stepdad arrived. We drove through the night. We didn't
Mhm.
have any issues in that state. The next
Right.
state, we got into the third state over. And it was about midnight and it was raining. We're on the side of a mountain, completely dark, and my stepdad's driving, but I'm comfortable because he's a safe person
Yeah.
to me and he's skilled professionally. That's what he does. He drives for a living. And out of nowhere, like desolate, out of nowhere, a car just flies up behind us, starts driving erratically, flashing the lights.
Oh
And I
my gosh.
remember I grabbed his forearm and I started to cry. And I'm like, it's happening. Like,
Oh,
this is what I was living through. And, being a firefighter, I think gives him a perspective of
right.
let's not
Yeah.
rush to
No.
judgment. Like, give it a minute.
Yeah.
And it just got so aggressive that I, at one point, saw my stepdad's whole composure change.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
And he's like, this is bad.
Yeah.
And to hear him say that, like a man
Mhm.
that never complains, never jumps to anything dramatic, to hear him say that was bad, I was
Yeah,
like,
because you told him about it 2 states over. So he was definitely following you, or you had a tracker on your car.
yeah, yeah. And so
Yeah.
this car eventually passed us through the mountains. I asked him to stay back a little bit because I was trying to process, like, this is happening again. I can't
Oh
get
my
away from
gosh.
this. And we pull into a small town, desolate, everything's closed, gas
Mhm.
station. And the same car that was following us was parked parallel to another car. They both had their windows down. They
Mm.
watched us as we pulled through like 30 miles an hour or whatever it was. The car that had the second car had its windows down, just like locked eyes with us. And as soon as we passed the gas station exit, it pulled out right behind us
Mhm.
and did the same thing all the way to the state line. And then it got off at the last exit and came back into that state. And all I held out hope for was the human trafficking advocate told me with the high profile person that she worked with, um, the only way that she was able to get all that to stop was to relocate them very, very, very far away
Mm-hmm.
and to go to more than general law enforcement and
Mm-hmm.
report all of that when you do. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's what I did.
Good.
And it was, yeah, like the totality of all of that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I, I think the domestic violence, people who stalk, there's the concept of like, oh, you've dated this person and now
Mm-hmm.
that person's at your work. But it up levels it
Mm-mm.
when you have power, wealth,
No, you have the wealth.
influence, and you look at like
Yes.
the Weinstein case.
Mm-hmm.
Like there was so much,
Yeah, similarities there too.
so much
Mm-hmm.
disbelief, I think, publicly that
Mm-hmm.
anyone could be stalked or
Mm-mm.
organize this or that.
Mm-hmm.
But like when all the reality of it
Mm-hmm.
came out, like there was hired stalking, like
No, they hire you.
intimidation.
Yeah, they hire them to just to intimidate you and
Mm-hmm.
scare you because
Mm-hmm.
it works a lot of
Oh
time.
yeah,
You're like,
absolutely.
oh, I don't want to deal with this anymore. If I stop,
Yeah,
then they'll leave me alone.
yeah, absolutely.
You know.
And
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, I haven't been able to live in my house since then. Like I'm states away from my home.
Still?
Yeah, still. Um,
Wow.
and so I'm trying to like put together in the next chapter and change that moving
Right.
forward. But it's been that happened, you know, it's fresh, like
Mm-hmm.
and again similar to
When did they stop?
so the stalking stopped. Strangely enough, I didn't know that I wanted to believe the human trafficking advocate. Like I respected her
Mm-hmm.
expertise, but
Right.
she was like, if you get enough states away, her description was, you have to get outside of their sphere of influence
Mm-hmm.
and power and money, and then like it'll be not okay because clearly none
Yeah.
of this is
But it might
okay.
die
But like
down.
the
Yeah.
stalking component should go away, and it did,
Yeah. Well, it's going to go
surprisingly.
away because you weren't moving forward with it
Mm-hmm.
legally,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Yeah, I reported it
this is
to.
also so you wouldn't move forward with anything, right? They wanted just to scare you from the start.
Oh yeah, to
Yeah.
just
Intimidate you and
yeah. Yeah, it's remarkable from my perspective that I was able to like live through that.
yes. Thank
Really,
God you did.
yeah. So
Mm-hmm. That's terrifying.
that's part of why I'm so passionate to use my
Mm-hmm.
voice because that was such
Good.
a obscene, aggressive
Mm-hmm.
move. With what's the goal? What's the end game?
Well, thank God you had your stepdad there
Yeah,
with you.
and he got to experience it and
Yeah, and
witness it.
mm-hmm.
Like it's that.
Mm-hmm.
Like with all of those things, crossing
Mm-hmm.
state lines, stalking people in positions of power. Like
Mm-hmm.
all I've come to the realization is, and I hope this changes my perspective. I'm open to it changing one day, but I feel like there
Mm-hmm.
really is two justice systems.
Mm-hmm.
And there really is, just like if rape is a perfect crime because people
Mm-hmm.
aren't brave enough to prosecute
Mm-hmm.
more cases, like all I've learned from this is status and power really
Mm-hmm.
does buy you a different reality.
It does.
And, you know,
Mm-hmm.
the last part of that, I'd say it reminds me of a time when the person on the island said that he really loved Michael Jackson. And I said, why? Like we were kind of talking about music. So I thought maybe he had like
Yeah, maybe like the
an
music.
album or a
Yeah.
playlist or something harmless. And he said, I admire Michael Jackson because he did whatever he wanted and his lawyers just walked up behind him cleaning up the mess and he
Mm-hmm.
just chuckled. And
Mm-hmm.
it's that, like
Yeah.
whatever that arrogance, that
Mm-hmm.
entitlement,
Mm-hmm.
it's great to be successful and go be a billionaire, multimillionaire, and build
Mm-hmm.
companies and
Yeah.
tour the world. But when you take it to the level of being so arrogant as he did, he
Yeah.
would tell me to my face that he was going to exploit this for as long as he could.
Yeah.
What do you do with that?
Yeah, he can because he can hire anyone to do that.
Yeah.
He can hire someone to stalk you
Yeah.
for 5 years.
Yeah. Outsource that on the dark web or wherever. Like,
Or yeah, you don't know what.
yeah.
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 You don't also know what else he has on you.
Yeah.
Videos everywhere too. Jeffrey also had a room, like control room with cameras and videos in every room.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And like
And it's for a reason.
you think of that too, like they recover those archives, those servers,
Mm-hmm.
but does anything happen? Like
No,
where,
just in case.
yeah.
It's only there to protect them.
Mm-hmm.
How are you doing today? Where are
Um,
you today on your healing journey?
yeah, I'm determined to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like shame and silence, I had a realization that those are just weapons. They weaponize those
Mm-hmm.
emotions, right? So even if they aren't in your physical presence, like that's still controlling you.
Yeah.
And so I made a conscious effort to like not have that be the case. And it's certainly not a linear
Yeah.
journey. I go to therapy 2 to 3 times a week. I'm
Mm-hmm.
very committed to like processing everything and
Mm-hmm.
working through it. But I'm determined to transform this and speak out and, help other people through this process. Like I can't
Mm-hmm.
unsee any of the things that I've experienced,
Yeah, you
but
can't.
if it's going to define me, it's going to define me in a way that can help others or connect or, help validate
Mm-hmm.
other people's stories. Similar to your article about being on the island, like being through that experience and reading that made me
Mm-hmm.
realize like I don't have to hide. It's still scary,
Mm-mm.
but I'm going to make that conscious effort to walk into the
Mm-hmm.
next chapter. Yeah.
That's a really important statement, like a powerful statement that you just said about if you're silenced,
Mm-hmm.
you're continuing to be silenced. They have the control
Mm-hmm.
still.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I never really thought of it like that till you said it,
Yeah. I didn't
but it's
either.
so true. It's like I'm not controlled anymore because I'm speaking out,
Mm-hmm.
and it's actually so freeing.
Mm-hmm.
Or
It is.
before 15 years or more,
Mm-hmm.
like I was silenced, and because I was in fear,
Mm-hmm.
and they still had all the control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's not easy and it's a scary thing to contemplate, but I often think like why is silence so powerful?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a layer of fear, I think, back on the
Mm-hmm.
predatory people. Like what happens if they're no longer I'm forever going to be
Mm-hmm.
fearful. I live with that reality and that
Mm-hmm.
trauma. But if I can open up the dialogue and the silence, like maybe I can flip the fear back on someone besides myself. Because at the end
Right.
of the day, it wasn't, like on
Mm-hmm.
me. That's not my shame. I'm not
Right.
going around violating and
Right.
doing all of those things to people.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I just kind of think of their why statement of like why that works for them.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And like, how do you take that away? You expose
Yeah.
their playbook. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, what safety measures have you adapted since leaving these relationships?
Yeah. Aside from, therapy and working out safety plans,
Mm-hmm.
I've made a conscious effort to educate myself on
Mm-hmm.
trafficking. I've read
Good.
a lot of books around, there's a handful of them out there
Mm-hmm.
that are situational
Right.
awareness. And even the things like I had shared, I grew up in a law enforcement family. So kind of taking the 3 to 4 turns to
Mm-hmm.
lose someone was like something instinctual.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, any books or things that I could read to become
Right.
even more
Mm-hmm.
aware of that. A common thing that I've heard from advocacy centers, so this isn't like my idea, but I think it's very powerful. And it's so hard to do when you're triggered in the moment. But if you can get your camera out
Mm-hmm.
and film something,
Something.
yeah,
Yeah.
if someone's
Mm-hmm.
stalking you, if you could suggest that you're live streaming it, I think that's a deterrent, especially with
Mm.
narcissistic individuals. Like the last thing they want to do is have their
Mm-mm.
image be something other
No.
than the great person that they are
Uh-huh. It's a good
on the
idea.
internet. Document,
Mhm.
and even if I don't believe that law enforcement is there to keep me safe, keep trying to like go report or say the
Mhm.
thing or reach out or ask for a status.
The paper trail.
Yeah, create
Mhm.
just a, you know,
Mhm.
I think that counterbalances. You, you don't like. There is no such thing as like guaranteed safety.
Mhm.
Um, but I think if you're more conscious of how you carry yourself through the world
Mhm.
and you educate, I think there's a huge piece on education there. Like that's powerful,
Mhm.
right? Like,
Oh, for
yeah.
sure.
So,
Yeah, education is everything when
mm-hmm,
it's concerned with
mm-hmm,
this. So we believe in the power of sharing our survivor stories. We're so grateful that you're here to share yours today.
you.
What do you hope in telling your story?
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind, besides just being symbolic of like the next chapter or taking back my power or relinquishing the silence,
Yeah.
is I've said it since the roofie rape, like I can't take back that this happened to me, right? So I want to transform that, whether that's through my art, through trying to speak out to maybe comfort someone else to the best of my ability that's going through something, or encourage them where to report. It's that, like, it's just I wouldn't say that rebuilding your identity is an easy thing because it's so just broken and shattered after something so traumatic, but I do think consciously rebuilding it with that lens of advocacy is like where it's at for me personally.
It is where it's at.
Mm-hmm.
And art can be super healing.
Yeah, absolutely. It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what does justice look like to you?
Before any of these things happened, I think it was the Law and Order SVU, you know, it all happens in an hour and they bring you a blanket and hot cocoa and you have a positive experience.
That has brainwashed everybody to think that's how it is.
Yeah, absolutely. I was part of that, like,
sure,
naive
same.
thinking. Justice to me is multifaceted. I work very hard to network with organizations that are trying to move the needle on dating app safety, regulations, reporting, helping to make people safer. Yeah, there's so many things. I've worked with a trafficking documentary company, and we're gonna put together some PSAs for how to spot trafficking on
that's
apps.
great.
So like whatever those things are, yeah.
Oh, that's good. So when you hear the powerful statement, from now on, how would you finish that sentence?
Yeah. From now on, I'm not going to hide. Like, I push back against all of the things. Like, someone could weaponize stalking or fear, but I think from now on, I make a commitment to myself to continue to educate myself and surround myself with a community of survivors and people that see each other and know each other's experiences. And I continue to build and stand in that foundation. I'd say I'm in a foundational, building phase, but I hope one day that I can build myself up to the point that I could help the next person or the next survivor. Yeah.
Right. That's almost the most important thing to me, is always being surrounded by people who believe you.
Yeah.
And really show that they care about you.
Yeah.
That's been like the best healing journey for me.
Yeah.
And this connection between survivor to survivor.
Yeah. Because you feel so isolated and you think that it's just you.
And
I think,
for so many years.
Yeah. Every connection helps you. It's like if you were building a house, it's like one additional brick to say like, oh yeah, like it's okay. And
to help you stand up.
Yeah. Yeah. So I hope one day that I can be a fully functioning, strong. I think I am some of those things now, but in a way that can transform others when that's again art or writing or documentaries, whatever that is. Like that's my life now, but I embrace it and I'm passionate about it.
I love that.
Yeah.
Good. Same here.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So grateful. I appreciate you holding space.
This is From Now On. I'm Lisa Phillips. Until next time, stay informed, stay empowered, and remember, there is strength in speaking out. And special thanks to our courageous guest, Jane Doe. Elizabeth Wyndham is our senior producer. Christopher Leone is the editor. Corey Wynn is our director of photography. And Jose Oriana is our studio producer. Our theme music is Many Worlds by Memory Theory. If you have any thoughts, questions, or stories about your own views on topics discussed on From Now On, email us at fromnowonpod@gmail.com. And please follow, rate, comment, and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. If today's conversation resonated with you, and you are seeking more support in your own healing journey. If you or someone you know has been sexually assaulted, help is available. Call 800-656-HOPE. If you or someone you know is being trafficked, contact the National Human Trafficking Hotline. Text 233-733. That's Be Free. PAVE is a 501c3 nonprofit creating a world free from sexual violence and building communities to support survivors. To learn more, go to shatteringthesilence.org. Speak Out, Act, Reclaim, SOAR, is dedicated to providing a safe and empowering space for survivors of sex trafficking to reclaim their stories and stand up for themselves and each other. That's www.speakoutactreclaim.org.